Greetings, greetings, greetings. Dumela, salvona, sakpase, namaste, upshin, dubra otra, assalamu alaikum, hotep. Welcome. Welcome to another episode of The Digital Couch. My name is Doriel Inez Larrier of Larrier's Education and Resource Network, where I plant seeds to help you grow. Tonight is episode 3 of Politician and the People. If you have followed me for a little bit, you know that here on the Digital Couch, we ask you to do two things. Number one, make sure that you have your favorite mug of hopefully some water or some nutritious beverage in order to keep yourself hydrated because there's going to be a lot going on during this conversation. The other thing is to make sure that you do not keep this information to yourself, that you do some sharing because sharing is caring, and that you let other people know that tonight we have a politician in the building. We are so glad, happy, and excited to have one of our state senators in the building, and that is in the person of Senator Kevin Parker. And so he'll be joining us in a moment. I do see him in the room. I just want to drop a few names that are representative of the places that he actually serves. So if you are from Brooklyn, and if you are from Brooklyn, you already know these names are familiar to you: Midwood, Ditmas Park, Kensington, South Slope, Park Slope, East Flatbush, and Flatbush. And depending on what part of the line that you stand on, what side of the street you stand on, it could also include parts of Sunset Park or Greenwood Heights. If you're standing on Washington Avenue, you might see a little part of that as well, Linden Boulevard as well. Welcome to the Digital Couch, Kevin Parker.
Thanks. How are you doing?
Good evening, Senator Parker. Good to have you here. Good to have you here. Thank you so much for gracing us on the Digital Couch. I see you have your tie. We are kind of matching
Yeah.
here.
Look, I try to be on message.
Thank you so much. You try to be on point. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Again, we are bestowed upon with such graciousness our state senator, Kevin Parker. We are going to have a little chat. Let me just give you a little bit of a background as to why we're even engaging in this conversation. Here on the Digital Couch, I have sort of expanded my power of story, which started about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I said, there are some common themes. If anyone asks me or asks people who know me, what are my common issues, it's really health, education, and welfare. And so those happen to be the three series that I have focused on over the past year and a half, one being education, called, now named, A New Class is in Session. My conversations about social justice and politics, that which I understand and hope to share with other people about understanding, and that's Politician and the People. And the third being Ministers on a Mission. And so I'm very glad and excited that my state senator has joined the throes of this conversation. Senator Kevin Parker, would you like to greet us and say good evening?
Yes. So, Darrell, first, thanks for having me. Again, I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. Let me say good evening to everybody who's listening or watching. I am the state senator in the 21st district in Brooklyn, as you heard, which is part of Canarsie and part of Flatlands, but principally Flatbush and East Flatbush, Midwood, Ditmas Park, Windsor Terrace, and Park Slope. And parts of other, some parts of some other areas. I'm the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee in the Senate, as well as the Majority Whip. And so it's kind of a lot of responsibility, a lot of things that we're dealing with. And happy to be here to have an opportunity to talk with you and to, share kind of the work that I'm doing on behalf of not just my constituents, but really all the people of not just Brooklyn, not just the city, but really the state of New York.
Excellent. So I did a little bit of homework, and
Okay.
this might be considered, let's say, Civics 101 or, Government 101. And for those of you who do not know, and I do have, of course, followers who are across the city, the state, the country, and the globe. And so in the U.S. Senate, I had to do my additional homework. In the U.S. Senate, of course, there are 2 senators for every state. 50 states, there are 100 senators. But then within I get this correct, within the state of New York, there are 63 districts And so you are the Democratic senator that represents District 21, of
Right.
which I am a resident. And just to shout out, as of August of 2021, we have 43 Democratic senators, and we have 20 Republican senators. As we're going to have this conversation, I started to look up the majority whip. Very interesting term, depending on what side of the street you're on. And so I actually wanted you to go into what is a majority whip, what is the responsibilities, and then let's talk about some of the legislations that you have enacted, some of the resolutions that impact the the redrawn lines, I would say, of our community. I'm trying to get these words right. Of our community, which is now, in terms of demographics, a bit different than it was before it was redrawn.
Right.
And some of the things that, of course, impact us here in current Rona. We know what that is, and how it's going to impact what we're doing in terms of our education, in terms of and I'll repeat these statements as we go along, as it impacts our families and communities in the next couple of weeks. So majority whip, resolutions and legislation, and then let's go into some of the committee work that you do.
Yeah. So real quick, just from a civics perspective, because in my other life, I'm actually a political science professor teaching at CUNY schools and SUNY schools and every place in between. The job of a state senator is somewhat different than a U.S. senator. I represent a district in Albany, which is the capital of New York, as opposed to Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, who represent the entire state of New York in Washington, D.C. Right. Similarly to members of the U.S. Senate, members of the state Senate have essentially the same kind of responsibilities as members of the state assembly in terms of legislation. But we also have an added responsibility of dealing with some things in terms of taxation and the budget, as well as confirming nominations from the governor on appointments. And so we do both of those things. And I always say that my job is half legislation and half leadership. The leadership stuff is what I do in the district. I have a full-time office. I have about 12 people who work for me. Most of them are here in Brooklyn. We do everything from constituent affairs, where somebody may come in and need help with an eviction. They need help with their light bill. Somebody may have an issue with domestic violence and need a referral to go somewhere. Somebody may need a job. Somebody may need help with immigration help. We do all of those things in my office. I run a number of events. In fact, last week we did our back to school event and a number of other partnerships with organizations that give away about 1,800 sets of school supplies. We'll do immigration clinics. We'll do free flu shots. We'll do turkeys for community-based organizations during Thanksgiving. We give away toys. Again, in partnership with various community-based organizations around the holidays, Christmas, and so on, right? And then there's the other part of my job, which is the legislative part. And this is really the constitutional part of my job, which is to pass laws for the entire state of New York. And we're going to talk about what some of those laws are. The biggest thing is the budget, right? So I say the legislative part of my job is two parts. It's the state budget and all other legislation. The state of New York has the third largest budget in the entire country, after the federal government, the state of California, then the state of New York. Right. Our budget this year, with all the COVID money in it, was actually a little bit over 200 billion with a B, $200 billion dollars. And that's money for everything from education to healthcare to housing to, the public protection and transportation. And the budget part of my job is two parts. Is putting money into the budget, again, for education, housing, healthcare, transportation, and public protection. And there's money out of that budget into New York City, into Brooklyn, and into the 21st Senatorial District, right? And so that's how some of the broad strokes on how the budget works. So in the process, again, I'm the majority whip, and the real title is really the leader's whip, right? Because I'm appointed by Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who is the Democratic leader of the New York State Senate, first woman to ever be a leader, third African American, and she's the first person in any either party to develop a supermajority in the New York State Senate. The Senate has never had a supermajority before, Republican or Democrat, and this is the first time.
So, wait,
So I'm her whip.
So let me ask that question. What had to happen so that she was allowed to do that? Was it?
Nobody allows you anything in politics. You take it. And so what she was able to do is win elections. And
but
so
can it be vetoed? Can it be
said, well, having a supermajority is, again, you gave the numbers of the Senate. Right. In the Senate, there's 63 members. There's only 20 Republicans, 43 Democrats. Having 43 members of any party has never happened before.
Okay. Right? So by default, she can say.
Not by default. Not by default. There's no default. She has led the Democratic Party in the state Senate to pick up more seats than any other political party in the history of the state of New York, and has given her a supermajority, which means she has more votes to pass bills with than any other leader in the history of the New York State Senate, right? And so I'm her whip, which means it's my job that when we're fighting on voting reform or rights for women or rights for LGBTQ communities, or dealing with the issue of police reform, or dealing with, this week we're going to be going back to Albany to deal with the eviction moratorium. She has more votes to pass those initiatives than any other Senate leader in the history of the state of New York. Okay. And part of my job is to make sure that we have the votes that we need to pass the various things that we're trying to get done. And so so I whip people in shapes, which is why
okay. So, would you consider?
I don't literally whip people, though.
I know.
There's no actual senators were harmed in the whipping of these legislation.
Not having a conversation today, right? So, but would you consider yourself as like the negotiator, or maybe someone who sort of like keeps, like, maybe parliamentarian procedure?
A lot of it is relationships, right?
Right.
Most of it is relationships. A lot of it is stick and carrot, right? Trying to figure out what members want. How do we create, legislation? Sometimes it's legislative changes that they want. Sometimes it's things outside of the budget that they want, or outside of the legislation that they want. But most of the time it's really around, understanding what different members from around the state, what their needs and concerns are, and make sure that they're represented in the context of the legislation that we're passing.
Okay. So you did say that this week one of the issues is going to be the moratorium. I know that one of the bills that you were passing was the banning of utility companies from turning off service to families during 2020. How has that gone? How successful is that? And are there any extensions because we're still in it? How is that going?
Yeah. So we actually obviously we all know we're in the midst of a pandemic that's threatened both our lives and our livelihoods. And so right after, I guess the beginning of 2020, as we saw ourselves in the full throes of the first part of this pandemic, we understood as a state legislature that we needed to start addressing some of the economic needs that people were going to have, especially when we had a shutdown. We didn't know how long it was going to last. We initially said 2 weeks. The shutdown lasted, I think about 4 months initially. And so as we went into that period, we knew that people lost their jobs. They weren't going to be able to pay their rent. As the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, I also was, keenly focused on the issue of utilities, right? Gas, electric, water, telephone, cable, right? Internet. And we wanted to make sure that people, weren't losing their services because of no fault of their own, because they lost their income, again, because of a pandemic that they had no control over. And so we passed 2 sets of moratoriums that protected people from getting their lights, their gas, their water cut off, their telephone, their cable, and their internet cut off during the emergency period. The emergency period was ended by Governor Cuomo about a month ago. And then from that point on, if you're somebody who has been adversely affected by, economically adversely affected by the pandemic, you can contact your utility company and let them know that, and there's another 180 days in which they can't cut you off, right? And so it's giving people some time to kind of get their economic house
House in
in
order.
order, right?
Yeah.
And then simultaneously to that, we're now trying to deal with the issue of what we call arrears, right? So all of the money that, so again, if you haven't been paying your light bill or your gas bill or your internet bill, for 6, 9, 10, 12 months, obviously that's a significant amount of money, and there's federal dollars that we're trying to match with programs in order to make sure that we clear up those arrears for people. And that is both for utilities, but also we've had some significant issues, obviously, around rent arrears as well.
Yes.
And so there was both a utility moratorium, which was legislation I passed, right? In fact, the second part of that legislation I passed with Assemblywoman Diana Richardson,
Yes.
also from Brooklyn, who's a former employee of mine, who I'm so proud of, has went on and got elected in her own right, and I've partnered with her on various issues. But we worked together to pass that utility moratorium, and then and so that's protected people on that end. But there also was a rent, essentially a eviction moratorium to make sure people weren't
Yes.
evicted during that period. And then recently, about a week ago, the U.S. Supreme Court essentially struck it down. Both the federal eviction moratorium, but also affected the state eviction moratoriums as well. And we are now in the process of negotiating with the Senate are negotiating with both the Assembly and the governor, the new governor, Kathy Hochul, to bring some legislation forward that we believe will help continue to protect renters and landlords
Yes.
as we continue to experience the pandemic, as we continue to experience a downturn in our economy, and make sure that people aren't cast into the street before they were able to catch their economic breath.
I was listening to a conversation on like public radio over the weekend, and one of the callers, and likely so, I had not heard this perspective. Most people are in conversation as, let's say, the rentees of, I've lost my job, I have no income, I'm not able to pay my rent, and it was a homeowner of, let's say, a small home, maybe 4 units or something to that effect, not like a large, like 16, 20 unit building. And the owner of that home said a lot of people, or this legislation is making room for the people of these like large buildings, but what about me? Like, I'm a homeowner, I own additional property, but I'm not necessarily being looked after. How is this moratorium impacting, let's say, homeowners who have additional properties, but they're not like, 16, 20, 50, 80, 100 unit dwellings?
All right, so let me say this: we have done a number of legislative initiatives, laws that we've created to protect both renters and landlords, both large landlords and smaller landlords, right? And we essentially created a moratorium essentially to stop the process of eviction for now, right? Second thing we did is we created a emergency rental assistance program. And the
Mhm.
emergency rental assistance program helps both tenants and landlords by essentially using federal dollars and paying people's back rent. So if
Yeah.
you're somebody who can demonstrate that you have been adversely affected economically by the pandemic, so you are a worker, you work in a business, the business closes because of the pandemic, you lose your job. If you can demonstrate that, you can then apply for this program, and then the state will pay the landlord your rent arrears, right? The average rent arrears in this moment in the state of New York is about $14,000. That's how much the average person is owes. But regardless of what the number is, if you can demonstrate that your rent arrears are caused by um, the pandemic, and you're not just somebody who's just not paying your rent, that the state will use federal dollars to in fact pay your rent arrears. And so that's part of the program that we are now in this week looking at fixing to make sure that we get as much of that money out the door as possible. But in addition to that, I'm also then working with my colleagues to hopefully get some of the utility arrears also paid. We believe that there's upwards of $4 billion worth of utility bills across the state when you look at all of those categories I talked about. water, gas, electric, telephone, cable, and internet. It's about upwards of $4 billion that's owed, and we want to make sure again that we are able to come through this pandemic with as little economic burden on the people of our great state as possible.
So is this arrears coverage, if you will? You said for businesses and let's say,
It's
homes.
actually yes, it's actually for commercial and for residential.
Okay. N- does that
Commercial
include
and
like
residential.
churches as well?
I don't think that churches qualify, but I can check on that. I do know that businesses that like a for-profit business commercial operation does qualify, and I do know that
Mhm.
landlords of all sizes, whether you're renting to one person or whether you're renting to 1,000 people, the program applies to you.
Okay. So then for profit commercial businesses. So then maybe people who might have non for profit or like small community based businesses, they might be in a
But
different
don't say
category.
well, again, any kind of business, right?
Okay.
And we don't distinguish around size. Any kind of business. I'm not clear that nonprofits, um, and that's just I just need to check on that. It probably
Sure.
does, but I'm just not clear right now, so I want to give a complete answer. But I know that businesses of all sorts, commercial businesses of all sizes qualify, and I know that renters and landlords of all sizes qualify.
Okay. All right. So now some of the things that you did speak about have to do, of course, with the like our economic foothold. But then there are also bills that you have worked on that have to do with healthcare, that have to do with, and I'm now speaking about because I followed when we first, let's say, were shut down, and you were very active regularly or routinely on your Instagram page. And so because schools were, or the educational system was severely hit. And I remember hearing you speak about trying to provide access with telecommunication and making sure that, Wi-Fi and what have you, was within the homes, whether or not families could afford it, or to make
Right.
sure to close the gap. So are you able to, let's say, maybe just maybe like dial back a little bit and just sort of say what you've done to that end? Because I know that you were very, very active in trying to close that gap and trying to make sure that at least all homes, as best as possible, had either device or at least the access to
Well,
connect with
yeah,
the device when they
yeah,
got it.
yeah,
And
Darrell.
where
So one of the problems that we're facing now, and it got really exposed even more, and this is even before the pandemic, was the issue of the digital divide.
right,
Right in this moment, access to high-speed broadband is as important as electricity, water, and gas, literally, right? And so during as the pandemic hit us and people started working remotely and more importantly going to school remotely, right? Um, we started seeing how the digital divide was affecting communities. And so when we talk
right.
about the digital divide, is really kind of two parts. There's the kind of traditional digital divide that talks about access to devices, right?
Hmm.
And you had tons of kids who didn't have laptops and didn't have tablets in their homes. And then you had the kind of more now kind of I refer to as the new digital divide, which is access to high speed broadband. And so you literally had kids, sitting in the parking lots of libraries so they can bleed off the Wi-Fi at the library, or going to Starbucks or someplace so they could do their homework. And so we found both issues, throughout the state of New York, and really around the country. Here in the state of New York, we did a couple of things. In the last year's budget, we actually passed a provision that created a $15 a month high-speed broadband program. And
Right.
so anybody in the state of New York, well, I shouldn't say that. Anybody who meets the income eligibility can get a $15 a month pro um, plan from any of the carriers,
Yes.
so that you can have it. And we also worked with like companies like Verizon, who actually provided free Wi-Fi to every home with a child in it in
Right.
night, right? And so that was done. We had companies like Spectrum that stepped up and wired, again for free, all of the homeless shelters and domestic violence shelters in their service area in New York City, again for free,
Very
to
cool.
provide high-speed broadband. And I think we're not really out of the woods yet. The Department of Education brought a number of tablets with Wi-Fi cards, and so if you're a parent with a child who's going to the public schools and they need access to a device, you should contact either the Board of Education or your school, because there are tablets and devices that are available to students for free in order to make sure that they have the devices that they need and access to high-speed broadband that they need to work remotely, but just as to do their homework. And this is an issue that's both an urban issue and a rural issue. And actually in some rural areas is worse than it is in places like Brooklyn, where we have what they call a last mile problem, where like they literally not even wired in some of these rural areas for Wi-Fi.
Can you say that phrase again? Last mile?
Last mile. Like, in other words, they'll wire like the main street, but again, in rural areas you have people living out on farms and stuff like that, and they're not like, they haven't wired all the way out to that particular farm. And so like you have people who live in these rural areas who literally don't have access to Wi-Fi. In New York City is more of, there are some places that haven't been wired, but the vast majority of the problem we have is what they refer to as an adoption problem, which is literally people don't have Wi-Fi because they can't afford it, and because it's so expensive. And we all know that. And even with a bundle, right? These bundles are very, where you have cable, internet,
telephone,
internet, right.
Phone, right.
But it's still expensive because you have to have all three of them. What if you just want Wi-Fi, right? And so,
right.
And so if you don't have that, $200 a month, like I have Fios in my house, and Fios is great, but Fios is super expensive. I don't even know how I can afford it, right? And so, we had to pass the utility moratorium, make sure I don't get cut off, right? Like it's a real thing, right? Like we're all going through very similar dynamics, and that's one of the things that we wanted to protect New Yorkers from, but also make sure that this digital divide doesn't continue to separate us. Because understand this is not just about kids with homework, although we emphasize that. We remember when they first started giving out the vaccine, you could only get the vaccine through an appointment on online, right? And so if you're a senior citizen who can't afford the internet or don't have it, how do you get the vaccine, right? So it's a healthcare issue, right?
And I remember.
Let me say this: if you're a parent, if you're an adult who lost their job because of COVID, and you're now trying to get back into the work world, how do you do that when you have to apply online for most of the jobs, right? Back in our day, we used to be able to mail in your resume. You can't even mail in your resume anymore. Now you have to download your resume. How do you get on Indeed or Monster or LinkedIn if you don't have high-speed Wi-Fi? And so it's an economic issue, it's a healthcare issue, it's an education issue, and that's why I'm saying that it's as important as water, gas, and electricity here in 2022.
Correct. I actually do remember you talking about, let's say, elders and access to their medical care, or access to a virtual doctor visit, which of course did occur before 2020, but with unless you were unable to breathe and therefore allowed to go into a hospital, anything else that was just shy of, you need to be on the emergency room table right then and there. You need to just go through these virtual walls. But if there are a lot of elders who do live alone, and they have we have like new phones, but they have older phones that doesn't have a camera, and if you can't leave the house, and who are you supposed to call if you don't have family members who are near, and all that kind of stuff. So I do remember you speaking about that, and although it was an issue, I don't think it became such a pervasive issue until everybody had the issue of, I do not have, like you said, it exposed a lot of the, not necessarily just the have and the have-nots, but the, I think I have, or I think I need, but I can't afford it, and so I won't. And now everyone's like, if you cannot see, connect, speak through a mirror, or through a camera, you're out of luck. You're out of luck. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much for sharing that part. There are some of the committees that the additional committees that you are a part of. I know the Senate Higher Ed Committee.
Mhm.
Can you give some feedback about that? I was just trying to do some homework and just really wanted to hear basically from you what that entails and how is that impacting us. You know, schools are opening back up, colleges, like what is, tell me what that's about.
Yeah, so currently I sit on about 7 committees, right? So in addition to being a
Right.
majority whip, I'm the chair of the Energy and Telecom Committee. So we deal with both energy issues like sustainable energy,
Right.
like you heard me talk about the utility moratorium and arrears. You've heard me talk about the digital divide, right? All of those things kind of happen within the purview of my chairmanship.
Mhm.
But I also sit on the Finance Committee, the Rules Committee, the Banking Committee, the Insurance Committee, the telecommunications, the Technology
And
Committee,
technology committee, right?
the Technology Committee, and I sit on Higher Education.
Yes.
And part of the reason why I sit on Higher Education is because Brooklyn College is the largest institution in my district. I have a lot of really, really good and big institutions in my district,
I'm
including
I'm a graduate. Thank you.
yeah,
It's one of my two of my degrees are from there. Okay.
right. And so, like Prospect Park is in my district, the Botanic Garden is in my district, the Brooklyn Museum is in my district, right? But Brooklyn College is probably the largest institution in my district, and so I know it's really, really important, not just because it's a large institution, but also because of the economic impact that it has. And in fact, just recently, Kathy Hochul, right before she became the governor, when she was a lieutenant governor, came out to announce a program that instituted about $9 million to a consortium between Brooklyn College, Medgar Evers, and Kingsborough Community College to do more work around essentially healthcare professions and particularly nursing.
Okay.
And so it's that kind of work that's important. And so what happens in the Higher Education Committee is really a couple of different things. One of which is higher education policy. As we start talking about, like at one point, CUNY was free, and how do we go back to a free CUNY and free SUNY, right? And dealing with like those issues. But also the professions are all licensed under the Higher Education Committee.
Right.
And so if you're a doctor and you get a license, or even a barber, like all those things, any profession in the state of New York that needs a license to operate, those licenses are established in law under the Higher Education Committee. And so the Higher Education Committee is from my perspective more of an economic committee than it is a academic committee. And so because we deal a lot more with giving people access to the kind of economic degrees and certifications that they need in order to participate in our economy.
Okay, so excellent like segue into this part of the conversation. So as it pertains to how the shutdown has impacted who is getting what degree, how long it's taking for people to get degrees, the shift in, do I need a 4-year or a 2-year degree, or is it better for me to seek a trade? How have and maybe it's a little too early to tell, but let's say maybe in the past 5 years or 10 years, has there been a shift of 4-year, 2-year degrees, or like more focus on let me get a certification? Because if you're saying that there's a link between Kingsborough, Medgar Evers, and Brooklyn College, and for those of you who don't know, Kingsborough is a 2-year college. Again, they have a global audience, Medgar Evers. And so how is this partnership going to push out or push through the balance between academic versus trade or skill-based certifications?
So I think there's less about that and more about how do we provide the kind of training that people need to participate in our current economy, right? And so
Right.
one of the things that we are experiencing in the context of this pandemic is we're starting to see that there's certain professions in which we need more people in, right? And one of the things we need more people in, we see, is healthcare. We need more nurses. We need more technicians. We need more epidemiologists. And so what that $9 million grant from the state did for Brooklyn, right, is provide an educational base and resources so that they can expand their programs in those areas and expand their facilities so that people can have students can have access to better facilities in order to get these degrees.
So wait,
right?
is that capital planning? Is that expansion of
It's both.
faculty?
It's
Is
both.
it
It's both. It's everything from building out science labs to
okay?
hiring new faculty, to doing marketing, to making sure that you have all the resources necessary to confer degrees in these areas and to expand the pipeline of people in healthcare.
So is this grant going to because it's a program, that means, let's say there'll be probably one institution that will oversee, or maybe there's a committee made up of
Yeah,
the three
Dora,
schools.
you're getting way too granular on how it operates. What you should kind of focus on is that if you're somebody out there who's interested in health professions, or you're somebody out there who's not clear about where you want to be, or academically, the health professions is one of those areas in which there is going to be resources and more opportunity, because the state government understands that is one of the areas in which we're lacking. I think we're going to see something very similar on mental health very shortly as well, because that's another area in which we understand we need more folks. Teachers, we're going to need more teachers,
That's the next
and also,
conversation. Mhm.
and so all of these areas that are real basic jobs. Like, this is not even anything technical. This is not anything new. This is not like, oh, we need more people who understand the internet. Like, this is just jobs that we've had over the last 300 years. We still need these jobs, right? And so,
Right.
if you're thinking, if you don't know where you want to be, or you want to be in mental health, if you want to know you want to be in healthcare, if you want to be in education, like, these are areas that we know where they're going to be full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits in the future. And now we have these three institutions that serve the heart of our community, who are more prepared than they were yesterday, to provide the kind of training that our community needs, not just to educate these folks, but really to provide the basic services that we need in our community.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, you are born and raised within the community. I check your pedigree. Of course, I always have to do that. So you started out at 193.
Well,
Honey.
let me say it like this.
Oh, well, okay.
The first 10 years of my life, I grew up actually in the Bushwick Projects in NYCHA, right? But even then, I was actually, I was actually bused from Bushwick to PS 193, which is in Midwood, right?
Right.
And then my mother worked at Brooklyn College, actually, and we moved to the junction where I still live.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to PS 193, and went to Huddy, and went to Midwood High Schools. I went to public school my entire life, before deciding to go to Penn State, because I thought I was going to be a professional football player. But that's a show for another day.
That's your show for another day. That'll be a new classes in session. But being born and bred in Brooklyn, and being brought up in the community that you also now serve, allows you to see the heart of the matter. Now, basically, where we live, you could probably hear that same fire engine, but because we live in the same area, you get a chance to see the growth, the shifts, the transitions of who lived there before, who are your neighbors now, who are the people in your neighborhood, and so it allows you to really speak to the needs of the people within your own community.
I like to think so.
One would say, right? One would. But as people in the community have changed, sometimes the needs are still the same because of, let's say, the institutions, and I say the institutions like the commercial businesses are in the community. What are some things that you have seen, let's say, from younger days that you still see today, but you know that they need like an economic boost? So you happen to have spoken about, let's say, Brooklyn Museum, Botanical Gardens. The Brooklyn Museum has gone through some beautiful changes over the past.
Let me say this. My district is very diverse, and it's always been diverse, right? The whole time I've had it, right? So I've had the pleasure of serving this community for 18 years.
Yes.
Right? And I've lived in this community, in Flatbush near the junction, for over 40 years, right? And I was the first my family was the second Black family on my block, and so I watched this community change from a white ethnic and Jewish community to a predominantly Black Caribbean community, right? But the issues and the needs of the community, to a large degree, have not changed. Right. Jobs have always been important. Access to education, access to affordable housing, access to healthcare are all the same. The thing that has changed more than anything else is the issue around immigration, only because the Caribbean community is primarily an immigrant community. And
Right.
so we've done a lot more work on immigration um, than anything else over time. Because, and even though immigration is not really a function of the state government, there are some things that we can do to be helpful. And I've done, like, for instance, a lot of work with CUNY's program called Citizenship Now,
Yes.
which will help people apply and get their paperwork together so they can change their status, whether it's getting a green card or permanent resident or becoming a citizen. Citizenship Now has been kind of at the forefront of working with the community to make sure that people have access, um, to a clear path to citizenship. Really, that frankly we have not gotten from the federal government.
Right.
Um, but beyond that, over time, I've seen, like, for instance, the Junction really blossom. Um, you know, there's a Target, there at the Junction now. I mean, it used to be, for years, it was a parking lot, right?
Right.
And now we have the
I
Target and
remember.
the Home Goods, and and a couple of other businesses there. The Applebee's, right? And so there's a lot more, again, economic opportunity in our community. We have an economy that over the let's say 20 years that I've had the opportunity to serve this community, that economy has moved from Wall Street to Main Street, right? And in our community, the main streets are Flatbush Avenue, Nostrand Avenue, Church Avenue,
First
Utica
Avenue,
Avenue,
Rogers. Yep.
right,
Foster,
Nostrand
Target.
Avenue, right. And so it's really about, how do you help entrepreneurs develop their opportunity? Now, entrepreneurs of all ilks need two things: they need access to capital, right, and they need technical assistance. So one of the
Right.
things I'm most proud of is working with Brooklyn College, and at the time, Congressman Ed Towns and then Senator Schumer years ago, to bring a small business development center
Right.
to Brooklyn College, right? And the idea was to give people a place in the community where they can get access to the kind of technical assistance they need to either build their business or grow their business, and the kind of access to um, capital, which will allow their businesses to thrive and to grow.
Excellent. And how functionable is that program now?
Is at Brooklyn College. You need it, just go on the website and find it. You can
Okay.
also find it through the SBA website.
Okay. All right. All
Mhm.
right. So we can resolutions. I started looking up some resolutions.
Okay.
Some of the interesting resolutions that I've seen, and I will say in total love, are reflective of the community that we live in. Some musicians you've done some resolutions
Mhm.
for. There was the one that's most recent is just the recognition of Juneteenth, uh,
Mhm.
as a to be um,
Well, we recognize it. We recognize it as a cultural holiday for
yeah.
years. We've done it. Actually, John Sampson started it, actually, even before I picked it up. And
Okay.
then I was lucky enough to have an opportunity, along with Assemblywoman Alicia Hyman from Queens, to actually pass a state law that made Juneteenth a state holiday the year prior to before Biden made it a federal holiday.
Okay.
You want to see me be great. So, he passed the federal holiday, but we did make it a state holiday prior to that.
Excellent. High five in the camera. I appreciate that. So, well, this just one of my last questions. When politicians come, let's say, to come to events, and when people sort of seek their acknowledgement, and there are these resolutions that are passed, can you break down what a resolution is and how it is significant? And so, or like proclamations, and I
Yeah.
say
So there's all kinds of awards and recognitions that we do, right? And so there are resolutions, which is at the highest level. Which what resolution is when we actually literally pause in our deliberation as a body and to recognize a person or an event
right.
or something that's happening in our state, right? And so you'll see things that honor people, let's say, because they got an award for something or they're being acknowledged for something. Sometimes we do condolence resolutions, right? I did a condolence resolution, for instance, for Pop Smoke, who his family lives in my community in the Canarsie part, right? But it was unfortunately, it was a condolence resolution, right? We've done resolutions around community events, or sometimes the anniversary of a church, for instance, or pastoral anniversary, right? So we do all kinds of resolutions for those things. Sometimes we do proclamations, which is kind of less prestigious because it's not something that we pass in the body, right? Just kind of an award that we produce, and we also produce all kinds of other kinds of awards. I do something called a Rising Star Award for graduates in schools. So, like if you're in elementary school or junior high school, you may have gotten a Rising Star Award from me. And so that's another kind of resolution that we do. Citations are usually done by the city council, but resolutions and proclamations are done by the state assembly and the state senate.
Excellent. So I wanted to just have this conversation, and thank you all for staying on. Thank you to the people who are on YouTube, who are on Facebook. And if there are any questions that are being asked, just so you know, we can't see all of them as we're doing this live session. But once we finish, we will be able to at least acknowledge you or answer a question if we're able to do so. I wanted to have this conversation, as I explained to a couple of people today. I said, when a person, an elected official, is able to take a moment out of their day, out of their time, whether they're being in Albany or, we're locally for the people who are in New York, and they are able to recognize that their constituents or people who are the champions for them, who are the cheerleaders for them, who are trying to participate in civic engagement, in social justice, when they take the time in order to recognize that that person is doing a lot for their local community, let me make sure that they get their voice heard, because I may not necessarily go to the steps of City Hall to hear you speak, because usually local people are not invited, right? But I may not be able to get on a bus, to go up to Albany in order to hear you, because we can't get in the room. Like, we're not allowed.
Well, that's not, please don't say that. That's not true. Well, and every single,
explain.
Record, every single legislative body has a public chamber where people can live come in. So the Senate chamber has a gallery. So does the Assembly chamber, and so does the City Council, and so does Congress have a public gallery that any citizen can show up and attend. Most days, those galleries are empty. The other thing is that we're also on public access television. So you can tune in when we're in session and watch us on television. And there's even some radio coverage of our session. So I don't want to go forward with you saying people are not invited, because it's not that they're not invited. There are always all of the meetings that we have, whether it's a committee meeting of the Energy and Telecom Committee, or whether it's a session meeting, or whether it's a public hearing, there's always public access to those meetings. And in fact, we have a public meetings law that actually requires that the public can see the meetings that we're having.
I accept the clarification. Thank you very much. Right. So, but all the ways that people can access their local politician. And now, thank you so much again for showing up on your Instagram account, and you were doing it like you were on like it seemed like every week or so, and I would catch you, and we would sort of say, hey, but I'm really thankful that you were able to take the time to come in, again, sit on my digital couch in order to speak to not just our local constituents.
Your couch is lumpy, by the way. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. Says your couch is lumpy.
No, it is not. I treat the people on my couch very well. Thank you. I exact all of them. But I wanted to say thank you for taking the time out in order to share. And again, to share the information that you share to most people. But sometimes people, they may not, read the brochures. They may not be able to, if they're working, they may not be able to participate, during the day when you're in session. But they will be, scrolling across their phones or looking on their laptop or whatever in order to hear that which their local elected officials say.
And people, and let me say, most of us are on social media. All of us have, phone numbers, emails. I mean, if you want to contact me, whether you live in my district or not, you can call my office at 718-629-6401. Again, that's 718-629-6401. You can email me at parker@nysenate.gov. That's parker@nysenate.gov. I am on every social media platform ever. No, but all the major ones. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn at Senator Kevin Parker.
Excellent.
So if you look at Senator Kevin Parker, you can find me on Instagram. A lot of time I respond to my own messages there. If you leave me something, if you leave me something that's polite, if you leave me something crazy, you getting blocked. Don't play with me.
Block.
I'm not for play. But so you can. There's real, I think, opportunities to interact with both me as your elected official and my office if there's questions, comments, concerns about anything that's happening in the public domain, or if you need help, or you need a family member who needs help with anything. Please don't hesitate. Reach out. I work for you, and we're here to serve.
I do appreciate it. So, folks, thank you again so much for participating. I do see some comments, but we'll be able to get to them once we finish this. Those people who are, again, interested in having conversations with their local officials, they are there to serve you. If it were not for us, they would not be. We would not need them. And so if you do have questions, comments, or concerns, as Senator Kevin Parker has addressed, make that phone call, knock on the door. If they are, wherever you see their local office, they are here to be for you. It is politician and the people. It's politician and the people. We are in this civic organization called Life Together, whether my senator, whether he is addressing health issues, education issues, communications issues, whether it is reproductive health care, whether it is marriage equity, whether it is, energy, conservation. Those things matter to us because they are concerns of ours. Your politician is not someone that just sits up on a hill or sits in a back office, but they walk the streets. I know my senator. I can see him. I can see him. I see him in
What do you want to?
Right. I see him in the junction.
Get away from me.
Right, that's right. So again, I thank you 1,000 times. I look forward to engaging in other moments, and I see you at church. There are many places that you can engage with your local official. They may not necessarily be your friend, but if they have to speak truth to power, and sometimes truth hurts, sometimes truth may cut, but if it moves you to live life better or to do differently, to do for your community, that's part of their job. Okay, so I thank you all. Please check back in with us for another episode of The Digital Couch. My name is Joriel Inez Larrier, the host of The Digital Couch, Learn to Grow You, which is Larrier's Education and Resource Network. I plant seeds to help you grow. And this has been episode 3 of Politicians and the People. We will have more politicians. We will have more. Thank you so much. I will see you on the next episode. Senator Kevin Parker, hold your mic.